first thing to do in this case is look at Lincoln's first inaugural address after he was elected as president, where he's addressing what it is, the tensions in the South regarding slavery. And a lot of this will be me quoting directly from these kinds of sources, so I hope it's not too disinteresting for you, but I hope the subject matter will be interesting, and I'm going to try and interject with my own opinion and little comments to try and flesh everything out as we go along. So, in regards to the slavery issue, in his first inaugural address, Lincoln said, "Apprehension seems to exist among the people of the southern states that by the accession of a Republican administration, their property and their peace and personal security are to be endangered. There has never been any reasonable cause for such apprehension." I mean, that turned out to be a lie. And once again, I'm not defending slavery at all as an institution. It was evil, and it still exists elsewhere in the world, in places like Africa and parts of Asia right now, which I think is terrible, but this will be relevant later. I don't think that we should go and start invading African and Asian countries just because they're conducting something that we see as a moral evil. I don't think that's good for us. I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. There has never, I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. I understand the proposed amendment to the Constitution, which amendment, however, I have not seen, has passed Congress to the effect that the federal government shall never interfere with the domestic institutions of the states. That is, of course, referring to the domestic institution of the southern states of slavery, including that of persons held to service. To avoid misconstruction of what I have said, I depart from my purpose not to speak of particular amendments so far as to say that holding such a provision to now be implied constitutional law is something we'll get onto in a little bit. I have no objection to its being made express and irrevocable. So what he's saying there is that he's in full support of an amendment to the United States Constitution, making it so that the federal government can never interfere in the slave trade in the southern states. Obviously, they would say that you can't continue trading slaves through the transatlantic slave trade, but internally, domestically, they wouldn't be able to do anything about it. And that amendment was the Corwin Amendment. And it is quite remarkable that he could say that he'd never seen it, given that he was a long-time politician and had just been elected as president. So you would imagine that these sorts of amendments, something as important as an amendment to the Constitution, would definitely be something that he was aware of. But even more interestingly, in Doris Kearns Goodwin's book, Team of Rivals, she suggests, through use of sources and having tracked this sort of stuff down, that Lincoln himself may have actually had a direct hand in creating the amendment. So that's an interesting lie that he's just thrown out. Very remarkable that he could try and make such an assertion. And I think it does put a little bit of a chink in the armour of those who say, like I've seen a quote from Dinesh D'Souza saying that Lincoln never said or did anything bad against black people, that Lincoln was some kind of radical abolitionist who wanted to get rid of it, when in fact he was more than willing to support an amendment that would have actually made it ironclad. They wouldn't have been able to do anything about it. And one of the things about this as well is that you can make the argument that he was a politician. Okay, I understand that. He was a politician. He was trying to make it seem good, make it seem that he wasn't doing anything against the intentions of the southern states or even the racist northerners, to make sure that he could stay elected and make sure that he could get through to a second term to do all of the stuff that he so obviously wanted to do. But the thing is, there's a contradiction there, which is people point out, oh, the northerners were racist and he wouldn't have been able to get in if he'd made it clear that he was a radical abolitionist who considered all blacks equals to whites. But at the same time, the narrative, the mainstream narrative, which I would consider to be the revisionist narrative, which is going against the truth of what actually happened, says that the northern states were also very, very eager to get involved in the Union, and to abolish slavery in the South. So there's a contradiction there. Either the people of the North were radical abolitionists who were very eager to get into the war to abolish slavery, or there were a bunch of rabid racists who needed to be lied to in their face to be able to elect Abraham Lincoln, who had secret ulterior motives. And I do think Lincoln was a dishonest person, but I think when he's referring to slavery, whenever he does, and his objections to it, there's no reason when you see his actions alongside that to think that he was being dishonest in this case, outside of saying things like that he'd never seen the Corwin Amendment. But if we go on further, we will return to his first inaugural address when we look at what the reasons for the war was. But if we go to 1854 and his it's American, so Peoria speech that he made when he was debating a Democrat called Stephen Douglas. He addresses slavery again in the speech, and let's see what he says about it here. Another important objection to this application of the right of self-government is that it enables the first few to deprive the succeeding many of the free exercise of the right to self-government. This is not in reference to the slaves themselves, because he goes on, the first few may get slavery in, and the subsequent many cannot get it out. How common is the remark now in the slave states, if we were only clear of our slaves, how much better it would be for us. They are actually deprived of the privilege of governing themselves as they would by the action of a very few in the beginning. The same thing was true of the whole nation at the time of our Constitution was formed. So the contention that he's bringing up here is not that slavery is a moral evil that should be abolished on principle. What he's in fact saying is that the people of the South, the slave owners, are worse off than they would have been otherwise for owning slaves, which as an economic argument is actually probably correct, but he's mainly complaining that the complaint is that the burden of slave owning, that being having to feed these people, clothe these people, look after them to a certain degree so that they're able to conduct the work that you own them for, is actually too big a burden on the slave owners themselves. So he's not making a principled argument in favour of abolition, he's making an argument in favour of it being too much of an inconvenience for the slave owners that their parents foisted this responsibility on them. So, important distinction to make there. Whether slavery shall go into Nebraska or other new territories is not a matter of exclusive concern to the people who may go there. Now, this is where he's getting onto the famous opposition to the extension of slavery into the northern territories in the US. And this is important because this is once again not necessarily on a principled argument, but instead an economic argument that he makes here. The whole nation is interested that the best use shall be made of these territories. We want them for the homes of free white people. This they cannot be to any considerable extent if slavery shall be planted within them. Slave states are places for poor white people to remove from, not to remove to. New free states are the places for poor people to go to and better their condition. For this use, the nation needs these territories. So once again, the opposition to the extension of slavery into these states was not because he was a radical abolitionist who thought it was evil to put them, to have men in chains anywhere. It was instead because he was arguing on behalf of the white labourers who were working there, to which slavery would provide an economic competition for. So it would have potentially pushed wages down. He was basically doing a protectionist argument in favour of restricting slavery from coming into those territories. Still further, he says, there are constitutional relations between the slave and free states, which are degrading to the latter. We are under legal obligations to catch and return their runaway slaves to them, a sort of dirty, disagreeable job, which I believe, as a general rule, the slaveholders will not perform for one another. Then again, in the control of the government, the management of the partnership affairs, they have greatly the advantage of us. By the Constitution, each state has 2 senators. Each has a number of representatives in proportion to the number of its people, and each has a number of presidential electors, equal to the whole number of its senators and representatives together. But in ascertaining the number of the people for this purpose, 5 slaves are being counted as equal to 3 whites, and this is the famous 3/5 clause of the Constitution. The slaves do not vote, they are only counted and so used as to swell the influence of the white people's votes. The practical effect of this is more aptly shown in a comparison of the states of South Carolina and Maine. South Carolina has 6 representatives and so has Maine. South Carolina has 8 presidential electors and so has Maine. This is precise equality so far. And of course they are equal in senators, each having 2. Thus, in control of the government, the 2 states are equals precisely. But how are they in number of their white people? Maine has 581,813, while South Carolina has 274,567. Maine has twice as many as South Carolina. Thus, each white man in South Carolina is more than double of any man in Maine. This is all because South Carolina, besides her free people, has almost 400,000 slaves. So once again, what he's making here is an argument that if we allow slavery to extend into the northern territories, the slave owners, who were more likely to vote Democrat, would have an outsized political advantage in voting than the Republicans who were opposed to the extension of slavery. Once again, this is not an argument on behalf of it being a moral evil that we need to eradicate. This is an argument from pure politics and economics. And we can see that He referenced there what's referred to as the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, where he said that the free states are made to capture fugitive slaves who've escaped from their slave owners, and that it was a dirty, disagreeable job, which is a remarkable thing for him to say, because obviously for those free states that it was, but because even under his own presidency, they were still enforcing that, even after the Emancipation Proclamation had been thrown out there.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.